Basically, in most races, only 10 to 20% of the voters are actually electing the leaders because of closed primaries. So because of that, the people who are running the country and running the city and running the state most of them are elected really in the primary, especially in a deep blue state like New York. And because so few people vote in the primary, you're getting people who are appealing to the most extreme elements of the party. But when you are running for office as a moderate and you're raising money and you're speaking to people, you realize, wait, only a small number of people actually are buying into these radical ideas. And really the general population is much more moderate and much more in the center. So it was something that our community very much needed somebody to stand up. I was really concerned that we were going into a place of very radical political ideas that were not rooted in what was really best for communities that were underserved, that these were policies that were ultimately going to hurt the communities that they were intending to help.
Welcome to New York Insider. I'm Liam O'Neill. Today I sit down with Maria Danzillo. 4 years ago, she was a political nobody. But in this time, she's run for political office twice, lost, but she did found a political nonprofit called One City Rising. Maria Danzillo, thanks so much for being on New York Insider.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Maria, the last 4 years for everybody has been tumultuous to say the least, and in many cases it's been life-changing. In your case, you've suddenly taken up something along the political sphere. You've run for office twice,
yes.
And now you are heading a nonprofit political action group called One City Rising. Back up 4 years ago to where you are now and give us a broad overview. How did we get here?
Well, thank you for the compliment. I hope it's true. So I did run for office twice, and the events leading up to that really came out of the COVID pandemic. We were all in lockdown. There were many changes to our day-to-day lives. For myself, a member of my family had experienced a medical crisis, and it was life-changing for our family, and it really brought to mind just how much you have to really be involved in your life and make sure that you're making very good decisions about how you're spending your time. And so during the COVID pandemic, I am a lawyer. I was practicing law, but my practice had changed during the pandemic because my clients were not able to do the kind of work they would normally do in an open economy. And so I had a bit more opportunity to look at some of the things that were going on in my own neighborhood and my own community. And I started meeting people and talking to people through social media about events that were happening in our neighborhood, the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is considered a very strong voting area. People are very politically engaged. And what we were seeing during the pandemic were many changes to the neighborhood having to do with an increase in crime. Schools were shut down. Those of us with children were very concerned about the impact school closures would have on our children's learning. We were seeing the mental health crisis in all its, it was something that became much more obvious to people living in New York, that we really were experiencing a time when so many people were not getting their mental health needs met. And we also had the nursing home issues with people living in nursing homes that were suffering with higher incidences of death and from COVID. So all of these things made many members of my community more observant and concerned about where we were going and where we were heading. And I became very involved with a community group, and that at that time, in New York City, we have term limits. So a number of our council seats were going to be turning over. So my community group decided that it would be good if somebody ran for public office. And I'm a lawyer with no name recognition, no experience, and this was the farthest thing from my mind to do. But I did offer to help find a candidate. And so I made a lot of phone calls, and we did, in fact, find somebody to run, and she was excited. I was going to be her campaign manager, and I was going to get her on, help her file all the paperwork, do all of that work, and then we would fundraise. And then at the very last minute, she decided that it was not something that fit. She had small children, and it was not something that fit with her time issues at that time. And so she decided not to run, and people in our group said, well, we need a candidate. I think you should run. And I didn't really think that was, the best idea at the time. But I said, well, I guess I'll give it a try. And so I did.
Walk the walk.
Yes, exactly. And I felt it was, because of the experience I had had with my with a family member, it just changed so much of my life and how I made decisions about what I was spending my time on. And I really wanted to spend my time on something that would be very impactful, that would, sort of cement my own belief that you have to make every minute count in your life. So it was something that our community very much needed somebody to stand up. And even though I didn't feel like I was the right choice at that time because I didn't have any experience and I didn't have any name recognition, I felt like it was something I needed to do, and it was the right decision to make. So I did that. We also, the incumbent, who was term limited, so would not be running again.
So she was on her way out.
She was on her way out. She had also basically made a statement that she believed in abolishing the police. So it was a time when a lot of candidates were calling for defunding the police. And our council member was actually calling for abolishing the police. So we felt it was very important to have someone who could speak in that arena about how policies like that, extreme policies like abolishing the police, is something that was really going to hurt people, especially in a dense city like New York.
And especially at that time.
Yes.
You're describing a time of all these problems coalescing into this really untenable situation.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, our subways were very dangerous. People were afraid to take public transportation. The crime rates were spiraling upward. They've stabilized now, but at that time we were seeing a very large increase in gun and gang violence throughout the city. The city had emptied out quite a bit. Quite a few people had left Manhattan in particular and gone to family homes elsewhere, visiting relatives, staying with people outside, because they did not want to be in the dense Manhattan. And those of us who were in the city saw that this was a very big difference because there were so fewer people on the street. So people who were mentally ill or dangerous, it was much more apparent and obvious. And the statistics were showing that crime was spiraling upward rapidly.
Yeah. Both statistics and your lived experience on the streets. And how big was that group? You're talking about the Upper West Side, 20, 30 people?
We were probably, so we started going to all the community board meetings, and there was a chat function in the community board meetings. They were all done on Zoom. And through that chat function, we actually started exchanging phone numbers and contact information. So our group probably started off with 10 or 15 people, but throughout the pandemic, by the time I was running for office, which was, I had declared my candidacy in January of 2021, and we all started, really communicating with each other and meeting in probably March of 2020. So from that period, I think we grew to at least 50 to 75 people who were actively in touch with each other regularly and trying to figure out and sort out how we were going to coalesce to form a group that would support a candidate to run for office.
So a real political awakening.
Yes. Yes, I would definitely call it an awakening. It's funny you should say that because I am an intellectual property lawyer specialist, and that's what I practiced my entire career. and I would say I was not politically engaged. And I think it was an awakening. So during the pandemic, we, many people picked something that they always wanted to learn about or do. And for some reason, I can't tell you why, I decided that I wanted to learn everything I could about 1930s Germany. And it was just, I don't know, intuition or a feeling that the time we were living in seemed so, we seemed so divided as a country, as a city, as a state, as a neighborhood. And it just felt like we were heading to something that was going to be very serious and maybe even ugly.
My goodness. So you had, during the pandemic, some people are baking bread,
Yes.
and you're up there reading about the rise of fascism
Yes.
in Nazi Germany.
Yes.
And then you're looking outside, and you're obviously looking at the world through the lens of, right? At whatever book we're reading at the time, we tend to look at the world through
Right.
that lens. And here you are reading everything you can about Mein Kampf.
Yes. Well,
and you're looking at our world in this crazy pandemic time. And this is interesting. This is your political awakening.
Yes. So I was reading those books starting, I would say, in March of 2020. At the same time, I started to connect more with people in my community who were politically engaged. And I was I was reading anything I could get my hands on. So I read Eric Larson wrote several books on the 1930s Germany, and that actually led me to one of my favorite books called How Did This Happen by Dan McMillan, which actually went back even further into why. It was basically to answer the question of how did Germany end up with a fascist dictator and murdering 6 million innocent people?
Right.
And that was the question he asks himself, and he goes back into really Germany in the 1880s, 1890s, and of course I'm not going to go back and give
Sure.
you that whole history lesson there, but reading the book was definitely, all of these books definitely changed my life in terms of how quickly things can go bad.
Can deteriorate, right?
How
and history
quickly-
repeats itself,
And
right?
history repeats itself.
Or at least it rhymes, as
Yeah,
people say.
and it just felt like at this point in my life, I felt a calling to be involved in the political space. It just felt like, especially as, my father was a veteran, he 11 years in the military, I'm daughter of first-generation immigrants who really came to this country with great hope and expectation of freedom, and I just felt that the last thing we want to do is lose that. We can't lose that.
So one of these, is it fair to call this call for abolishing the police by your district person, your district representative, would you call that a tipping point for you?
I would say that was one of several tipping points. I think that there was some very serious problems with police. There are serious problems with policing, and at that time there had been very serious, very visible, serious problems with policing in the United States with the murder of George Floyd, and certainly you can understand why many people in this country were fed up and angry. For me, when I look at New York City and I think of so many of our communities are suffering from crime and underinvestment, that the idea of abolishing our police just didn't make sense for New York City. Like, I think the better way to have phrased it would have been, better education for the police, better training for the police, not just abolish the police.
And what you just said sounds, I think, more practical to many people.
Right.
However, it sure got a lot of oomph behind it, right? This call
Yes.
for defunding or abolishment, even to that extent. Why? Why did it appear to sweep the land in some aspects? In some,
I mean,
in some point of view, it did. It kind of just swept the land.
It was certainly everybody running for public office felt that they had to say they were in favor. Many Democrats. I can't say anyone running for public office, but I would say most Democrats in New York City in particular had to support defunding our police
In some
in
respect.
some respect.
Yeah, because you had told me in a pre-interview call, I think, I want you to retell this story. You heard this call for defunding or abolishment, and you thought, this is bonkers, this is way too far. We need reform, perhaps, but this is way too far. And then you, within a couple of weeks, made a public statement that
Yes.
you are not for defunding. How did that feel at that? And I think you were nervous at that time.
Yes.
I mean, it was a little bit scary.
Yeah, I was really, when I go back to the whole defund the police movement, I really am very sorry and sad and empathetic for, all the innocent people who have been, hurt by over-policing in their communities. And I think to your point, perhaps there wasn't, or to your question, perhaps there wasn't a strong enough or clear enough response for police reform. And so maybe that just created the environment where people were just angry and it just built on itself. And there was also the pandemic where everybody was home and not working and on social media. So it was kind of like the perfect storm for a political movement.
Okay.
But I also think there were other forces that fed into that. But from my perspective, having read all I read and where I was thinking the world was heading, I was really concerned that we were going into a place of very radical political ideas that were not rooted in what was really best for communities that were underserved, that these were policies that were ultimately going to hurt the communities that they were intending to help, and that when you really look at the statistics, when the United States is spending, I think it's like 1% of our GDP on policing, which is kind of the average for a developed country. And we have really high crime rates. And all of that points to the reason why in underserved communities, murder rates are in fact so much higher than in other places, that when you start really looking at the numbers and you're looking at the statistics, abolishing the police was just the kind of call that was going to hurt people more than help them. And so it didn't seem like, I've never been somebody to just go along with crowd thinking.
Okay.
And so when I was hearing it and reading about it, while I was deeply empathetic to the underpinnings of the movement, it felt like we needed a more common sense approach. Okay. Also in New York, we have a police department that is, at this point, a very diverse police force. It's, I think, over 50% of our police officers are considered
That's right.
diverse.
It's a minority majority, as they say.
Yeah, and in fact, leadership positions in our police force are held by people of color. We had a female person of color, one of my favorite people, and we have a wonderful police commissioner now, also a person of color. So, it just didn't feel like in New York City, abolishing our union police force, mostly people of color, or majority people of color, that abolishing that police force made a great deal of sense. So yes, so I was, right after I declared my candidacy, I was told by people in politics to reach out to community leaders, and I met somebody who was a community leader in Brooklyn, in the Black community, and he was putting together a rally with the Asian community, where they were going to stand together to ask for city council not to defund the police. Right. And he asked me if I would be willing to speak at this rally. And I had never done anything like that before. It was really nerve-wracking. I remember driving there. A friend of mine, one of the women in our group, said, "I'll drive you." And we're sitting in the car with masks on, deep into the pandemic. I think it was like in February, I'm going to say, of 2021. And it was right after I declared, no name recognition, and now I'm going to this rally where I'm going to be asked to speak on this highly contentious subject, where basically every single candidate who's running is saying we have to defund the police. And
is that right? You were unique in the field?
well, there were
Wow.
5 or 6 of us there who were all running, and we were all together on this issue. So I
Okay.
wasn't alone. It
Okay.
was other people who were also seeing what I was seeing, and they were willing to stand up and say that. But it was definitely a moment of real soul searching
Yeah.
about, what was I.
Testing your convictions.
I guess, yeah, and courage. I mean, yeah,
Encourage,
I know. So anyway, so we get to the rally, and it was really cold out, and I was there with the community leader from Brooklyn, and a woman who was running for city council, also from Brooklyn. I think there was somebody there from Flushing running for city council. We were people who were united in the belief that this particular issue was not something that was good for New Yorkers. It's something, police reform, yes. Better education, yes. Better training, yes. Better equipment, yes. Less reliance on dangerous firearms, yes. All of those things were needed. Police reform, yes. Education, yes. But abolish the police, defund the union police force, take away their pensions, all of that, maybe cut the number of police officers. What community is going to be hurt by that the most? It's not the Upper West Side, where crime rates were relatively low and stable. It was really underserved communities that were going to be hurt the most. So I had my notes, and there were quite a few media there, mainstream media, and I just read my at that time, I wasn't very well versed in just speaking off the top of my head. I was very well prepared, and I read my notes, and I basically said I was against defunding the police. And I had photographs taken next to me with the 2 candidates, one from Brooklyn, one from Flushing, with these big "Do not defund the police" signs. And I thought to myself, well, there's no coming back from this.
Okay. Point of no return.
This is a point of no return. I've drawn the line in the sand, and there's no going back now. So that's who I am, and that's where I'm going to be in this race. That's the lane I'm in.
And good instincts, because there was a time where defund the police was quite the buzzword, right? There was a lot of oomph and vested interest behind that. Where that comes from, that maybe is a point for another discussion. But nevertheless, it's shown the vast majority of Americans were not buying into that. And you stood on their side. And you said in your answer, you said, this was just not, I've heard you say this a number of times, and it's on your website, One City Rising, we just need common sense.
Right.
Policies, right? This was a very radical policy, very short, with short vision. Obviously is going to hurt the communities that need it most. In our discussions as well, you've talked about how you are politically homeless. Can you explain what that means to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lifelong Democrat, so I registered as a Democrat as soon as I could register in a party, and I always felt, an allegiance more to the democratic principles. But in the last, I would say, 10 years or so, it just seems like the Democratic Party has been captured, ideologically captured, especially in New York City, where our closed primary systems have made it very difficult for people who do not appeal to the most extreme members of their base to win primary races. And so, being a lifelong Democrat and running as a Democrat, when I ran for city council, I ran in the Democratic primary. I came in second out of 6 people, which for a newcomer with no name recognition was pretty good. We were happy with that result. But, it felt like to actually win in a primary when you have so few voters and the voters who are voting are the most extreme, you start wondering, I started wondering, where I fit in the Democratic Party in New York City. And so I will continue to be a member of the party, and I will continue to support many of the good ideas, but I view myself as a moderate conservative Democrat. If there's a place for me in the party, I don't know. So I do feel, at least in New York City, somewhat, on the outside of the mainstream of the party. And I guess that makes me homeless.
And you feel that?
Politically homeless.
Yeah. I think you feel a lot of people are in that boat.
Right. Well, I think that became very apparent from the 2 races I ran, that doing as well, I mean, going back to the city council race, after I declared that I was running, and I say we because it was really a community effort. I was just the person that had the hot potato in my hand at the moment that it was thrown. And so I ended up with the hot potato, and I was the one who ran. But our community group, we raised the full amount we were allowed to raise because we were in the campaign finance matching fund system for running. And so we had a limit on what we could raise. And we raised the full amount in 39 days, whereas the other candidates in the race were taking years to do that. And we just raised the full amount from small donations in the community. We had more in-district donations, I believe, than any other candidate, and we raised the most amount of money in the shortest amount of time. And so what that said to me and to us is that, yes, this is where most people are. In fact, statistically, if you look at, the open primary system, that there are groups that are calling for open primaries, something I believe in very strongly. That in
open primaries means you don't have to be a registered Democrat or Republican or any party to vote in that primary, but I think usually you can only vote in one primary.
Correct.
That's open primary.
Yes. So people who are working in the open primaries to try to bring open primaries to New York have done significant research on this. And basically, in most races, only 10 to 20% of the voters are actually electing the leaders because of closed primaries. So because of that, the people who are running the country and running the city and running the state most of them are elected really in the primary, because the general is not a competitive general, especially in a deep blue state like New York. So that whoever wins the primary is the person who's winning the race in November. And if they're in a deep blue district, like most of New York City, except for Staten Island, is deep, deep blue, whoever wins that primary is actually winning in the general. And because so few people vote in the primary, sometimes it's as low as 4 to 5% of the people who are voting. You're getting people who are appealing to the most extreme elements of the party.
Right.
So, but when you are running for office as a moderate and you're raising money and you're speaking to people, you realize, wait, only a small number of people actually are buying into these radical ideas. And really the general population is much more moderate and much more in the center.
Yeah, we had. I thought it was very interesting. You and I were talking previously right now, and saying I think we were both finding some common ground here, or common understanding that, especially in recent years, this binary red, blue, Republican, Democrat is really kind of a false binary.
Right.
And this is similar to how the radical policy of abolishing police can seem to have so much sway, but in fact, it does not. The vast majority of people are neither, starkly blue or starkly red. It's somewhere in the middle, and this is a false binary that is very divisive.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think I love the way you connected the dots from defund the police to the false binary. I think that, especially in New York, where the Republican Party, for example, doesn't have much power, and they're not getting people elected, especially in the deeper blue sections of the city, we need to move away from that binary, because I think moderates aren't really that interested in the labels anymore. Like they'd be willing to vote for a moderate Republican running in a general over a radical Democrat. And I think that that's something that, we have some elections coming up in June, and I think OCR, One City Rising, is looking at those races and hoping that people who are stepping up to challenge, that the voters actually do vote person, not party. I think that in a deep blue one-party state, you have to vote person and not party. And I think what this will hopefully do is make it easier for moderate Democrats like myself to actually win races, because we would have more people saying, you know what, I am going to go out and vote in that primary, or I am going to get involved. So we're hoping that more competition in races and more visibility on races and less focus on whether you're red or blue, and an open primary system where you don't even have to have a party affiliation to run will not only make people more interested in voting, energize people to get involved in local politics, but also take the incentive away to speak only to the radical extremes of your party. And I do think that the primary system, I was thinking about this earlier today, that the primary system, which I think is broken, is what's feeding so much divisiveness. I really do, because I think that we're electing the most divisive people. And until we fix that, we're going to continue having a very divisive political landscape. And people are going to feel homeless, and people are going to feel like, why can't we just get normal? Why can't we return to normalcy? Why can't we have some normal, common sense people? You know, I mean, the idea that somebody would say we should abolish the police, like that is just ridiculous.
One City Rising has a forthcoming report on open primaries.
Yes.
When is that coming out?
Yeah, so One City Rising is really we're trying to align with many community leaders from around the tri-state area and in New York City to come together to try to achieve some of the goals that we have to energize voters, to make people more interested in city and state politics. It's not just national. You really have to care about what's going on locally, and also to educate voters and educate people on important issues. So we are doing reports. We do reports regularly. I'm not going to say monthly. Our goal is monthly. We try to get them out monthly. We did a report.
You're just a year old, right?
We're not even a year old. We just launched a few months ago. But we did our first report on the true cost of the homeless crisis. The true cost of the migrant crisis. And we did a deep analysis of how much it's really costing city taxpayers to house and feed people coming through the southern border in New York City, and the impact it's having on our budgets. And we've seen, since we wrote the report last fall, we have seen one of our founders of OCR, Jason Curtis Anderson, wrote the report. And he really, back in the fall, he was seeing the impact it was going to have on city budgets. And in fact, that
he's been vindicated.
He's been vindicated. So the next report, to answer your question, we're doing a report on, our next report to come out, which we're very excited about, is going to be on the reasons for taxpayer exodus from New York City. And we're talking about divisiveness in the political landscape. We're talking about extreme politics, extreme policies that are leading people to leave, escalating costs, inflation, high taxes, bad regulations, mayhem and chaos on our streets due to underregulation of big tech car and delivery apps, that sort of thing. So we're getting into all of that in the next report, and then we've got another report coming out after that, which is underway, about, which we're very excited about also, which is about the impact that not-for-profit groups are having on city policies and politics. And we are going to get into, the report after that is going to be on, and we've started the work on it, on how so few voters are electing our leaders. So we're going to do an analysis of lots of different districts in the city and talk about how, in some cases, only a few, sometimes, I mean, there's a district in assembly race in Queens where the winner won by like 15 votes, and it was extremely low turnout. So we're going to be talking about how it's really important that more New Yorkers vote in city and state elections, that these should be just as important as voting for your Congress member or your senator. that we really need people to take it seriously, because these people are getting elected by such small numbers, and winners are being elected by extremely small margins. So we're hoping our report will get people to wake up, and they'll have their own political awakening around the need to be involved.
You know, as we finish up, I want to ask you somewhat more of a personal question.
Sure.
We've gone through in your answers how the political landscape is very divisive, very divided, very polarized, but indeed this is a false binary in some respects, but in other respects, it's not. There are some real life impacts for how polarized we are. And someone has said, as the role of religion over the last couple of generations has receded from our lives, politics has taken the place of religion. And we approach politics as if we're approaching a religious war. And my tribe is right, your tribe is wrong, and to hell with you, right? How has this political awakening that you've gone through, if it has at all, ruffled any of your relationships?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's a very powerful question. And I would say, you're right about religion. I mean, the numbers are clear that that the number of people who are involved in organized religion has gone down dramatically in the last 20 years. And at the same time, we've had this, woke movement that has taken over so much, captured so many, young people who are not attracted to, religion, but are but are following. I remember
with a religious fervor.
With a religious fervor, like, if you're not with us, you're against us, silence is violence, like all of those phrases that were used, in the last 10 years or so to make people feel that if they don't go along with a certain ideology, that they are, against the ideology, whereas they might not want to participate in it. That doesn't necessarily mean they disagree, they just don't want to be involved. So, I mean, it's sort of like the Crusaders. Like, it felt like a crusade the last 10 years, and I'm a mother of 3 children, so I watched in their schools how their
high school, college age during these times. Very difficult.
Yes, I have 2 who are seniors in college and 1 who graduated in 2020 and 2021.
And they're in the hotbed of these contentious
Yes, and
movements.
I was watching and listening and seeing how ideology was replacing religion as a core value that these young people were asked to follow. That it was something like political ideology became sort of like a religious mission, like a zealousness about certain political issues. And it's very scary. In my own life, in my own relationships, definitely, I mean, my family alone, I think we have 5 of us, and we all have different political perspectives on things. I would say...
That makes for interesting Thanksgiving, right?
Well, yes, we don't talk about politics. In fact, at Thanksgiving, as some of our extended family were entering the apartment, I overheard my husband say to one of them, "Whatever you do not bring up politics, because you're going to set Mom off, whatever you do." So it was kind of like a warning, don't do it. And we got through most of the dinner until about the last hour, when perhaps all of that pumpkin pie kicked in and people were feeling a little giddy and a little courageous. And somebody mentioned a subject, I don't think I want to get into it right now, but somebody mentioned a subject that I'm very passionate about. And that was it. The fireworks went off, and we were at that point, 5 of us were all, ready to throw a few chairs on the floor. So we try not.
But we're still family.
We're still family. We still love each other. We still get along. But I'm dreading I'm dreading the presidential race if we don't get a third-party candidate to step up. Like, I can't imagine what it's going to be like over the next couple of months as we watch the 2 candidates who are likely to be running in the general election in November do get out, I think it's going to get very ugly for families.
Well, hopefully you have One City Rising to help kind of steer the way for us with your common sense reports and common sense advocacy. So good luck with the organization. Thanks again for coming on New York Insider. We'd like to have you back again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And One City Rising is at onecityrising.org. We have quite a lot of good material on the website. We post our reports on the website. We also have a way to sign up for our newsletter. We issue it, we're trying to do once every 2 or 3 weeks. It's filled with interesting news items that you don't hear about in many mainstream media. So we try to tell voters what they really want to look out for on certain issues as we go forward. Okay. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here,
Thank
Maria.
You.